Hey everyone, John here, and I have been very busy testing and analyzing Switch 2 backwards compatible games. We're looking at 25 different games today, ranging from minor improvements to very drastic ones. So let's begin with Advance Wars. Now this game has two frame rate instances. There's the bird's eye view on the table, running at 30 FPS with quite a bit of judder, and then the actual battles technically running at 60, but they never really do on Switch 1, hanging usually around, between 20 and 40. It's an absolute pleasure to say that both are fixed on Switch 2. The bird's eye view table is still 30 FPS as you can see, they'd have to patch it to remove that cap, but when you get into battles, it finally meets 60 FPS, and it is beautiful. And even the 30 FPS moments are far smoother, with a nice stable line the entire time. Now, I've seen a bunch of people focus on Batman Arkham Knight, and I suppose with good reason. This game was far too ambitious for the Switch, and runs really poorly, while looking pretty poor too. And Switch 2 does bump it to 30 FPS, consistently. There's no drops anymore, even in the Batmobile sections. But with that said, this game is still pretty ugly, and some people are reporting crashes as well. So I'd rather focus on Batman Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, which are way more stable and way better looking. On Switch 1, both of these games were not very stable. Even when hitting 30 FPS, as you can see, very jaggedy line. But they'll quite often drop to around 24 FPS as well. Arkham City is worse than what we're seeing here, this is Arkham Asylum. But the Switch 2 does bump these up to a constant 30 without any judder in the line. And in the same instances that dropped on Switch 1, we are remaining at 30 on Switch 2. Now, let's talk about a really weird result. We had a few comments saying, check out Mario plus Rabbids, and so I checked Sparks of Hope, still 30 FPS as always was, nothing too unusual there. But then I checked Kingdom Battle, and this was a 30 FPS game on Switch 1, pretty consistently so. But on Switch 2, it is now 60 FPS, which is incredibly unusual. Frame caps usually can't be budged. If a game is capped at 30, it's going to stay at 30 until it's patched. But it seems that Mario plus Rabbids had a double buffer VSync, meaning the game was programmed for 60 FPS, but the Switch 1 could never hit it, and so it's always at 30. But now we have more powerful hardware. It's just constantly hitting 60 FPS. So I guess I'm introducing the Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle Remaster. Have fun with it. It looks glorious. And I am very, very pleased with this one. This is Bakeru by Goodfeel, who you'll know for the Yoshi games like Woolly World and Crafted World, and there's also Goemon talent behind this game, and it really doesn't run very well on Switch 1. It aims for 60 FPS, but usually sticks around the 40s, even in this area where nothing is really going on screen. But on Switch 2, we are bumped to 60 the entire time. I've not found a single instance where the frame rate drops. We're just constantly at 60 FPS, which is transformative for this game. There's a demo which I recommend checking out, but this is just a tremendous hidden gem, and one that I think people will really come to appreciate as the Switch library gets older. Let's look at another Goodfeel game though, Princess Peach Showtime. For the most part, this game runs fine at 30 FPS. The cutscenes are weirdly pre-rendered and encoded at 24 FPS, so they're not real time, they're just movie clips. I'm not really sure why they'd encode them at 24 and not 30 like the rest of the game, but that's just the way it is. Anyway, the big problem with Princess Peach Showtime is sometimes it runs at 0 FPS. Sometimes it just stutters for a moment while the game catches up. And is this alleviated in the Switch 2 version? The exact same moments that would hang up on Switch 1 are not happening on Switch 2. It just feels so much more stable and not like it's hanging on by a thread a little bit. And one of my all-time favorite games is Beyond Good and Evil. And for the most part, the Switch port is pretty good. And it's capped at 30 FPS, I wish it was 60, but it's understandable why it's capped because some parts of the game can drop. And we're mostly talking about parts that have alpha effects, like this waterfall right here. This waterfall is the downfall of Beyond Good and Evil on the Switch. This happens a lot during combat as well, it's not just near the waterfall. So is it fixed on Switch 2? And the answer is mostly. As you can see, we're getting 30 FPS for the most part. But as soon as I walk under the waterfall for a moment there, we do drop down to 19, 20 FPS just for a moment. So this probably is the ultimate stress test for the game, this waterfall. This is about as bad as it gets. But it is interesting that it is still there if you push just hard enough. My fellas, tell me you've played Cruis'n Blast. This game's bonkers. I'm a dinosaur drifting around in a prehistoric era with cars, and the frame rate on Switch 1 is pretty inconsistent. We're going between 60 and 45 frames per second. It very much does not like this boost. The boost brings it all the way down to around 45. And on Switch 2, constantly 60. Doesn't matter how much we boost. The biggest frame drop I saw was 59 frames per second, so losing 1 frame. And I'm afraid we're going to have to smash the system because of that. And I always found it really impressive that the Switch 1 could play Crysis, because I remember building a PC specifically to play Crysis, and having it in the palm of your hands was awesome. But as you can see, that line is not exactly smooth, even when 30 FPS is not smooth, and there's a bunch of frame drops bringing it all the way down to 24. This game can hit the teens as well, so not the best performer. And just like Pete's Showtime, there's points where the game can literally just stop for a moment to load in a bit more, because they're quite large sandboxes. So does the Switch 2 avoid all of that? Let's take a look. And for the most part, yes. There are still some times where that line isn't entirely smooth. There's moments where frame pacing could be better, but it's not dipping, and it's not stopping either. You can go around this map as fast as you want, and I didn't encounter a single time where the game would hang up. And a game very close to my heart is Dragon Quest III HD 2D. And for the most part, this game runs pretty well on Switch 1 at 30 FPS, but there is very complex lighting, very complex shadows, and it's an Unreal Engine 4 game, which never goes very hand in hand with the Switch 1, and so you get some towns which are just so full of effects that the Switch 1 comes to a crawl at around 23-24 FPS, whereas the Switch 2, consistently 30, not a single frame drop in the exact same town, in the exact same conditions. This is one that I'd love to get a full-on Switch 2 edition, because I imagine it can do 60 FPS just fine as well. It's gonna be weird if Dragon Quest 1 and 2 run better than 3 on the Switch 2, so please update this. Now, let's look at Pokémon Let's Go. This is Let's Go Eevee. And for a moment, I thought my memories were playing tricks on me, because I remember this game performing quite poorly in areas, but I was constantly getting 30 FPS on the Switch 1. So what was the problem? Well, the performance issues are in handheld mode, which we can't analyze because it's not lossless quality. So let me try and demonstrate best as I can, because it is still quite obvious. When just running around in Viridian Forest, you'll notice not only does the game drop frames, but the game's speed drops as well. So you must be able to see that the game is slowing down here. Whereas on Switch 2 in handheld mode, nothing of the sort. We are getting a full-on 30 FPS, no slowdown. And in fact, there's more Pokemon in this scene too, so there's more pressure. Let's also check out Minecraft. This will most likely get a Switch 2 edition down the line, but there's no announcement yet. But for now, the Switch 1 version runs absolutely flawlessly in the open world. 60 FPS, no problem. But as soon as you join a busier town, you are definitely going to get a worse experience than other platforms. Mineville here is quite commonly hitting around 20 to around 25 FPS on the Switch 1. It can be better depending on where you look, but in this busy plaza here with lots of players and lots of complex structures, yeah, we're not getting a very good result. And Switch 2 does not iron this out to 60 FPS, but it is a whole lot more playable. We're on average getting around 45 to 50 frames per second, which is a whole lot better. But I imagine if this got a native Switch 2 port, this could be ironed out completely. I was going to compare Doom Eternal on the Switch 1 and Switch 2, but to my surprise, it's actually incredibly stable on Switch 1. I didn't get a single frame drop in this encounter here, just 30 FPS the entire time. One thing we can do, though, is compare the visual quality. So does Switch 1 look any worse than Switch 2? Let's put them side by side a moment. I know a bunch of you are watching this on your phone, but on a larger 4K screen, there is actually quite a large difference in quality here. The Switch 2 is absolutely hitting the higher end of the dynamic resolution. Dragon's Dogma on the Switch 1 is another one with rather bad frame pacing. You're going to see a jaggedy line quite often, and sometimes you'll notice drop frames as well, although it could be a whole lot worse than it is. This isn't the worst example we have. But Switch 2 irons out everything. No bad frame pacing, no frame drops, just consistently really good. And speaking of frame pacing, here is Mario & Luigi Brothership, where every couple of seconds you get a little squiggly line. So it's consistently 30 FPS, but it still feels pretty rough, and like it's slowing down, even though it isn't really. Although in some areas it definitely can drop frames. However, let's focus on the frame pacing for now, and Switch 2 just powers through it. There's really no squiggly lines anymore. I did notice one instance here, but otherwise it is an entirely straight line. So Brothership may not be transformative on Switch 2, but it is going to feel a whole lot smoother. We tested a Rockstar game last time with GTA 3, and that's now consistently 30 FPS. But what about LA Noire? Is this also consistent? Well, on Switch 1 there were some frame pacing issues, but there's also some genuinely dropped frames. It can go to around 24 FPS, and I've noticed because this game is so tied to animation, some scenes also literally slow down when frames drop as well. But on the Switch 2, no frame pacing, no drops, just very, very smooth. And to this day, the facial animation is very impressive in LA Noire. This is held up incredibly well visually. Another game I'm really pleased with is Neo: The World Ends With You. This is uncapped on Switch 1, and sometimes hovers just over 30 FPS, but usually hangs around 40 to 45 frames per second, at least in the overworld. When it comes to the combat, again it's just over 30, and Switch 2 powers through the entire thing. 60 FPS in the overworld, 60 FPS in combat. I couldn't make this game shake a single frame. Now the image quality is still rather low, but playing it at 60 is a transformative experience, and I'd highly, highly recommend playing this game. Now pretty much every game in the Ninja Gaiden trilogy has issues on Switch 1. The first game fares the best, the second game fares okay, and the third game is by far the worst. But let's just check out the second game for a moment. So this runs at 60 FPS, that's its frame cap, but during pretty basic encounters, you can nudge this all the way down to the 40s. It does hold 60 pretty well most of the time, but I want to get rid of those drops entirely. And Switch 2 does, just constantly 60 in the exact same encounter, exact same circumstances. Now let's look at No More Heroes 3, and there's two different things to keep in mind. This is both a 60 FPS game and a 30 FPS game. And the 30 FPS part is where it fares the worst. This is the open world. It runs at 30 if Travis is pretty static and not in his bike, but as soon as you get in there and start boosting around, you're going to get incredibly low frame rates. And this is with a very low image quality as well. The 60 FPS fights fare better. It does hold 60 some of the time. These are much smaller arenas, much smaller scale. But of course you can bring it down all the way to a not ideal frame rate. So let's look at those battles first, and they are 60 the entire time on Switch 2. But how about the open world? This is far more demanding. So Travis is on foot here, hitting 30 FPS. In the bike, boosting, not a single drop frame. The game still doesn't particularly look very good, very low image quality, but you'll notice in the Switch 1 version, if you zoom into the distance while boosting, parts of the world are still being loaded in. It's like you can just kind of fall off over there. And simply giving it more power does not overcome that. This will need a Switch 2 specific patch to address these issues and make it look a whole lot nicer. And here's a very cool one as well, Penny's Big Breakaway. Very underrated game. This launched at 30 FPS on the Switch, but got a performance mode making it 60. However, it ran on a double buffer VSync, and so on some of the busier levels, which happen to be the first ones, so not the best first impression, it can go all the way down to 30 FPS in certain areas, and it's very jarring. So does Switch 2 fix that? Say the motto? Yes! Yes, of course it does. Constant 60 the entire time. I will say the Switch 1 version does run at 60 in a lot of later levels. This isn't a huge issue everywhere, but it's nice to alleviate it across the board. So the results have been near perfect the entire time, but let's check out a game that does not resolve its issues, and that is Skyward Sword HD. This runs at 60 FPS most of the time, but certain effects in boss battles can hitch it down to around 40 frames per second. And yeah, Switch 2 doesn't fix this. We're getting a frame drop in the exact same moment to the exact same figure even. Not a major issue with this game, it doesn't happen often, but I do wish it were fixed. Let's also look at Shin Megami Tensei 5, and would you look at that, it's our friend the squiggly line, meaning this has bad frame pacing. There are also some genuine frame drops as well, so let's see, is this fixed on Switch 2? Yeah, nice smooth line, get out of here frame pacing. I also couldn't find a single instance that went below 30 FPS, so this seems constantly fixed without any frame pacing. And let's bring out the big guns with The Witcher 3. This game can run pretty well depending on the area, but we're right outside a city here, and right in a city here. And we're constantly running around 20 to 25 frames per second, sometimes below that. Definitely not ideal for the Switch 1, and the image quality is rather low as well. Switch 2, consistently 30. I cannot make this game drop a single frame. We're still stuck with that low image quality, and I do think this is a good candidate for a Switch 2 edition. The Witcher 3 did get a PS5 and Series X patch after all, and CD Projekt Red just gave us Cyberpunk, so it's rather likely. But yes, this is very stable on Switch 2, even if the actual image quality isn't transformative. And Trials of Mana was very surprising. I remembered this being a 30 FPS game, and that's because usually it runs around 30 FPS, but it's entirely uncapped. So you're mostly getting around 33 to 34 FPS, leaving you with a rather unhinged feeling frame rate. And Switch 2 just turns this into an entirely 60 FPS game. No drops, way faster load times, and it brings it really close to the PlayStation 4 version, only portable this time. And let's check out Xenoblade Chronicles X. And just walking around New LA in my mech, I can drop the frame rate to around 26 frames per second, which isn't ideal, but for the most part this game does run a pretty locked 30, even if there are frames every now and then, especially in New LA. It's also worth noting that when changing your party member, the game takes a while to get back to full speed while it loads them in. So are these issues resolved on the Switch 2? Let's take a look. And as you can see, just walking through New LA, same circumstances, just jogging around in the mech, 30 FPS. Although, there are some frame pacing issues turning their head here, not a very smooth line. But it is 30 FPS locked the entire time, sometimes trying to be 31 FPS. You shouldn't be doing that, X. You're 30. There is a 60 FPS toggle in the game's code, so it's a very likely candidate for a free update, but for now, it's 30. But what about that loading in issue when changing your party member? Let's take a little look. Is that still there? Yes, it's not as egregious, but it definitely is still there. Doesn't last as long, doesn't go as low, but you still feel the game loading more stuff in. And those are 25 more backwards compatible games that I've tested on the Switch 2. We did another video on this when the system was just 1 day old, so check out that if you haven't. That includes Hyrule Warriors, and Bayonetta, and Smash, and way more. And Brandon's working on another Switch 2 backwards compatibility comparison, so there are so many games to check out. The Switch library is massive. It's going to take us a while to get through a lot of these comparisons. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, everybody, and I will catch you next time. Bye-bye.